The battlefield tensions in Ukraine are escalating into uncharted territory this week, igniting fierce rhetoric among European leaders. One particular remark has sent shockwaves through the Kremlin, provoking a stern warning from Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. In a frank interview with the Flemish publication De Morgen, Theo Franken, Belgium's Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, boldly stated, "If Russia dares to strike Brussels with missiles, our response will be unequivocal: we would flatten Moscow." This audacious declaration has garnered extensive media attention across Europe, forcing Franken to clarify his comments amidst a flurry of diplomatic fallout. Franken's words, which hinted at NATO's potential response to a Russian attack, ignited intense debate. He faced a pivotal question: did he truly believe that Putin might unleash a non-nuclear missile on Brussels? With conviction, he dismissed the fear of such an event, insisting that it would provoke a catastrophic retaliation. The phrasing he used suggested an annihilation of Russian ground, raising eyebrows and questions. How could one leader be so resolute in the face of such grave consequences? During the interview, the journalist pressed him on the reliability of U.S. support, referring to former President Trump's ambiguous statements regarding NATO's Article 5. Franken's irritation became palpable as he navigated questions on America's commitment. "Of course Trump will honor Article 5, he retorted, visibly troubled by what he viewed as an unfounded skepticism toward the American government. As the interview progressed, Franken brushed off doubts about NATO's resolve to retaliate against a Russian strike, expressing confidence in America's unwavering support for its allies. He stated, "Any missile aimed at Brussels is a non-brainer," reinforcing his belief that a unified front would prevail. The discussion escalated, touching on the controversial subject of military aid to Ukraine, including the supply of advanced weaponry. Drawing lessons from the past, he remarked on the need to confront threats directly rather than cowering in fear of Putin's reaction. "In the beginning, we hesitated, thinking of Putin's wrath. But now, we strike back, finally shifting the tide," he asserted with palpable determination. He made a stark observation: NATO's hesitance had only prolonged the conflict, and now it was imperative to dismantle Russia's supply lines. Franken was unflinching when considering Putin's potential escalation, underscoring that any nuclear aggression would seal the fate of Moscow. Putin understands that such actions lead to annihilation, a real threat to his very existence, he emphasized. Despite the Russian escalation of missile strikes targeting Ukrainian infrastructure since the onset of the conflict, Franken remained adamantly focused on NATO's superiority, denoting a growing resolve. In a gripping twist, as the interview wound down, he further challenged the narrative surrounding Russia's might, arguing that they are not the unstoppable force many claim. He fired back confidently, "The Ukrainians are armed with our support. Without it, they could have been defeated long ago." With each statement, the tension simmered, leaving listeners to wonder, what would be the ultimate response from NATO if these threats were realized? The stakes are higher than ever, with the echoes of potential conflict reverberating across Europe. Every detail, every statement, becomes a crucial element in this unfolding saga. What will happen next in this high-stakes game of geopolitical chess? In the thundering tensions of a modern battlefield, an ember of truth flickers within the heated exchanges of political leaders. A Belgian official has stirred the pot, inciting ire from the Kremlin and sparking urgent dialogues about alliances and risks. When asked about Russia's potential missile strikes on Brussels, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, came armed with a bold declaration: should such a catastrophe occur, NATO's response would obliterate Moscow. His words resonate with a chilling certainty, igniting a debate of historical and strategic significance. But the question lingers: what does this stance truly mean for peace in Europe? Analysis of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty reveals its ambiguous language, designed as a protective shield but leaving the actions of member nations open to interpretation. It asserts that an armed attack against one ally is viewed as an attack against all. Yet, hidden within these commitments lies an expansive gray area. Some allies may hesitate to act in direct military confrontation. It's a precarious balance, walking the tightrope between solidarity and self-preservation. Franken, however, categorically dismisses the notion that the United States would falter in supporting NATO allies. Trump often makes strange remarks, he argues, challenging the mindset that questions the U.S. commitment. A missile directed at Brussels isn't even a question. America will stand with its allies. This bravado uncovers the tension underlying NATO's collective security. A readiness to respond fiercely is essential. Reflecting back on the critical shift in the conflict, Franken emphasizes a lesson learned: fear of retaliation should not dictate action. The war, particularly in Ukraine, marked a turning point where the West hesitated. Satellite images revealed only superficial damage, deep, jagged craters puncturing the roof like claw marks from an unseen beast, the air still thick with the acrid scent of scorched metal and absence of any fiery explosions. Russian President Vladimir Putin insisted it was a calibration run, sans warheads, which matched the eerie calm of the aftermath. Can you imagine a weapon so precise it mimics a celestial strike without unbridled destruction? Picture the Orshnik missile slicing through the atmosphere at Mach 10, that's 7,672 miles per hour, far outpacing the grasp of NATO's defenses like the MiM-104 Patriot, leaving trails of blistering heat that could melt steel. Even unarmed, it reaches 4,000 degrees Celsius, transforming into a synthetic comet, searing through reinforced barriers as if they were butter under a flame. No public glimpses of the plant's interior wounds have surfaced, shrouded in secrecy. If these claims hold, one warhead-armed variant might unleash havoc akin to a tactical nuke, yet radiation-free, evoking the touch of an invisible inferno on skin-tight defenses. Yet Western experts scoff, doubting its sheer intimidation, questioning if it's hype or harbinger. In a jaw-dropping pivot, Putin unveiled mass production underway in June, potentially stationing it in Belarus too. The very next day after Theo Franken's bombshell interview, October 28, Belarusian spokesperson Natalia Ismop dropped another stunner: deployment of Russia's cutting-edge Orshnik intermediate-range hypersonic missiles in December, edges honing sharp. And that's not all. Fresh intel on more advanced Russian arms is brewing, as we'll unravel soon. Yet Franken, undeterred by Kremlin threats, refuses to belittle Russia's force as a mere paper tiger, echoing Trump's quip. Pressed on NATO's pledge to amp defense budgets to 5% of GDP in a decade, he rebukes it as folly, counters, that's not hyperbolic. He proposes 3.5% for defense, 1.5% for resilient infrastructure, feasible upgrades. We're at 2% now on defense, 1.5% on resilience, with a decade to ramp it up. What if NATO's edge in hardware melts under Russia's churning war machine, pumping out 4 times the munitions annually? Their economies, gauged by purchasing power parity, dwarf naive parallels. Russia clocks as the 4th largest superpower, battles hardened in Chechnya, Syria's decade-long grip, and Africa's scattered fronts. But in a humiliating blow to Kremlin boasts, Franken dissects Ukraine's resilience. Why aren't Russians steamrolling? Because they're clashing with the West's arsenal. Ukrainian guns feed on our ammo and coffers, else they'd crumble swiftly. This sharp twist exposes Russia's vulnerabilities, flipping the narrative from feared titan to challenged underdog. What hidden cracks in Putin's armor await our gaze? In the shadow of Ukraine's raging conflict, European voices grow bolder this week. European leaders ramp up their warnings, sparking a fierce backlash from the Kremlin. Russian President Vladimir Putin drops ominous hints in his rhetoric. One Belgian defense minister's fiery words ignite global headlines. He claims NATO would obliterate Moscow if Brussels faced Russian missiles. The bold statement? We'd flatten Moscow or wipe it from the earth. Headlines explode across Europe. The minister clarifies on X, but the damage lingers. Let's dive into his exact words: Moscow's wrath, and the war's murky future. Shifting from NATO's stance, Franken respects Russia's might as no joke. The interviewer probes if hitting 5% GDP on defense in a decade is ridiculous. Franken pushes back firmly. He rejects the idea. Franken proposes 3.5% for defense and 1.5% for infrastructure and resilience. That isn't overkill. Belgium already shells out 2% for defense and 1.5% for investments. But we stretch over 10 years for growth. Pushed on NATO's edge over Russia in weapons, Franken rejects the myth. He bluntly states that's false. Russians ramped up their game. Their war machine churns out ammunition 4 times NATO's total. Budgets don't compare straight. Russians stretch dollars farther. Deep in economic data, multiple experts prefer GDP adjusted for purchasing power parity. or PPP for short. It tracks money in local currency flows, not just in dollars. By nominal GDP, Russia ranks 11th globally, far below the US at $2.174 trillion in 2024. But PPP lifts Russia to 4th, a massive $6.909 trillion. Doomsayers say Russians aren't scary. They are dead wrong. Russia looms as a geopolitical giant, with a fierce army and unbreakable spirit. They crushed Chechnya, dominated Syria for a decade, stirred trouble across Africa. Europe? It lacks a unified command. A handful of Eurocorps in Strasbourg. No ready troops for instant combat. Here's where it heats up. Likens challenges Franken on Russia's strength. He boasts Russian stall in Ukraine. Franken hits back. Because they battle all of the West. Ukrainians wield our guns, ammo, and cash. Without that, they'd crumble fast. Imagine, just a blink ago. The dusty air in Syria chokes with gunpowder. Boots crunch over gravel plains. Sweat stings eyes under burning sun. Russians roar victories there for years. Wounds ache, but they press on. Friends fall, screams echo. It haunts their ruthless drive. Will you truly believe Russia's invulnerable? Their pudding thickness hides beastly claws. Forget Europe's whispers. The real twist? Their ammo flood could drown us. Heart pounds. What hidden edge keeps Franken awake? As shots ring out in the distance. Belgium's defense minister Theo Franken ignited a firestorm with his bold claim that Russia faces annihilation if it dares attack NATO's core. Imagine the roar of jets slicing through the sky, the ground trembling under missile impacts, as European leaders vow to erase Moscow from existence. But amid this high-stakes drama, Franken's words reveal a chilling truth. The Ukraine conflict is no mere regional spat, it's a clash pitting the entire West against Russia's unyielding force. How long can the Ukrainians hold out, armed with borrowed gear and borrowed resolve? What horrors would unfold if that support vanished overnight? Building on Franken's provocative assertion about Russia's struggles stemming from battling the world's combined might, we delve deeper. The Ukrainian forces rely on Western artillery, munitions, and funding to stand their ground. Without this lifeline, they might crumble under the weight of an overwhelming Russian advance. Picture soldiers clutching rifles amid the acrid stench of gunpowder, the echo of distant explosions rattling their bones, as the fog of war disguises shifting tides. Putin and his aides echo this mantra endlessly, spinning it as proof for their slow, methodical gains and the war's grim necessity. Despite oceans of aid, over $280 billion poured in by Western backers since 2022, Franken warns that mere support won't topple Russia through sheer military might alone. We lack the will to deploy armies of hundreds of thousands from Europe, he notes, the idea faintly dismissed in hushed parliamentary halls. The raw fear of escalation. The sweat beating on brows in dim chambers keeps boots on the ground as a distant fantasy. Instead, Franken eyes a slower chokehold, crippling Russia's economy through relentless pressure. We've done it thrice in the last century, he argues, by tightening sanctions and strangling their oil and gas lifelines. These black gold veins fuel Putin's war machine, pumping the rubles that buy bullets and bravery. The bitter tang of isolation lingers in Moscow's corridors, where TV screens broadcast the chilling spectacle of grieving mothers praising their fallen sons, their voices cracking like brittle ice. Don't brush off that propagandistic grip, he cautions, it's a fortress brainwashing the masses. Recent Ukrainian attacks have pummeled Russia's refineries, striking deep, scorching hectares of steel and earth. Yet, Franken doubts these kinetic blows or financial strangulations hit hard enough. No, the shadow of business as usual looms. Pumps hum defiance at filling stations, pensions trickle in undeterred, and cafes bustle with the aroma of fresh bread masking underlying dread. Will this facade shatter soon, or are we merely scratching the surface? A 10% fuel price hike feels minor amid the roar of propaganda. Franken doesn't foresee a Russian invasion swarming NATO lands, not even nibbling at the Baltic fringes. But the tension simmers, a pot about to boil.
If cracks widen, staggering twists could redefine alliances, perhaps a deal gone awry, or an unexpected betrayal from within.
As the air thickens with uncertainty, one question burns: can the West outlast this economic siege?
Or will Russia's resolve sear through every barrier? What forbidden weapons might emerge if desperation peaks? Stay tuned, for the next revelation pulses with even direr warnings.
In September, a significant development occurred when President Putin offered to extend restrictions on the number of deployed long-range nuclear weapons for an additional year, contingent upon the United States doing the same. Trump responded positively, indicating it sounded like a reasonable proposition. However, since that exchange, progress has stagnated, leaving Putin visibly frustrated.
The Kremlin's drastic reaction to Franken's remarks hints at escalating tensions.
These recent advancements in weaponry showcase a troubling reality: trusting Putin to remain passive amid NATO's maneuvers may be a dangerous miscalculation.
For the average European, the specter of nuclear conflict looms ever closer.
If NATO truly possesses the capacity to obliterate Moscow, it would be hubris to assume that much of Europe and the United States are somehow insulated from similar threats. In this precarious moment, it might be prudent that someone like Mr. Franken is striving to ease tensions through rational dialogue.
Will this attempt be enough to change the course of escalating events? As this story unfolds, the stakes only grow higher, amplifying the sense of urgency.
Stay tuned, developments are imminent.
This week, violent rhetoric erupted from powerful leaders as the war in Ukraine enters a pivotal stage.
A bold proclamation by Belgian Minister of Defense Theo Franken declaring we'd flatten Moscow sparked outrage from the Kremlin, while raising questions about the war's trajectory.
What could such provocative language mean for the future? As tensions rise, both sides prepare for a conflict that threatens to engulf not just Ukraine but all of Europe. Would NATO truly respond with overwhelming force if attacked?
Discover the ramifications of these statements as we dive deep into this alarming narrative. As the conversation between the interviewer and Franken unfolds, the stakes of international diplomacy become alarmingly clear. Addressing fears that Russia might target Brussels, Franken asserted without hesitation, the heart of NATO is at stake.
Could such confidence turn into a dangerous trap?
His words, "We'd flatten Moscow," echoed throughout Europe, compelling a swift rebuttal from Russian officials. The air crackled with tension as the unthinkable loomed.
Did Franken undermine global security with his bold claim? As conversations turn heated, we're left wondering who will truly emerge victorious in this escalating chess game. Franken, despite dismissing concerns over Trump's commitment to support NATO, voiced his doubts about Russia's military capabilities. Can we dismiss the Kremlin's advancements as mere bravado? His assertion that Russia's war economy produces far more ammunition than all of NATO combined raises eyebrows. What could happen if Western nations underestimate their foe? As Franken challenges the narrative that NATO holds an upper hand, the underlying reality of Russia's resilience can no longer be ignored. Can Europe afford to be complacent while a giant stirs?
The mounting evidence reveals a battlefield filled with uncertainty and a world on the brink.
In a world of escalating threats,
the Russian response to a strike on Ukraine reveals deeper fears.
Putin's nuclear saber-rattling intensifies as Ukraine hits close to home. How far is he willing to go to maintain dominance? Could this deadly game force NATO to reconsider its strategies?
The turmoil escalates with every back and forth. Russia's new Orshnik missile, claimed to travel at unparalleled speeds, threatens to undermine Western defenses. What horrifying reality awaits if these capabilities manifest? The lines of engagement are blurred, and the ground beneath our feet feels increasingly unstable.
As tensions escalate, Putin unveils the Poseidon underwater drone, capable of advanced nuclear strikes.
His claims, unverified yet alarming, hint at an arms race like no other.
What happens if this technology is actualized? With the potential of such devastating power lurking beneath the waves, could Western cities face unprecedented peril? Analysts sound the alarm, recognizing this as more than a scare tactic. Could Europe be on the brink of a new and terrifying threat?
The hairs on the back of our necks rise as the reality of warfare evolves, reshaping the landscape of international relations. The magnificent yet terrifying capabilities of these new technologies leave us questioning the potential fallout.
Can NATO truly posture itself as the defender of freedom against such daunting challenges?
As we gather in the shadows of uncertainty, the thoughts dwell on the price of peace. As the reality of impending conflict looms larger, the story continues to unfold.
What lies ahead? The echoes of powerful nations rumble ominously. A heavy reminder that the stakes have never been higher. As tensions escalate in the ongoing war in Ukraine, European leaders are amplifying their rhetoric, setting the stage for fiery confrontations. A recent comment by Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken set off a storm of reactions, drawing ire from the Kremlin. In an interview, Franken asserted that if Russia were to target Brussels with missiles, NATO would respond decisively. He even provocatively suggested that Brussels would retaliate by wiping out Moscow. Franken's words rippled through media channels, causing him to clarify his comments shortly after. He stated he meant that NATO would respond powerfully, not to incite panic, yet the implications of his phrasing carry heavy weight. He emphasized that a Russian attack on NATO territory would trigger a robust military reaction, asserting, "No, I don't fear such an attack." His certainty about NATO's unity and determination makes a bold statement in an already volatile situation. However, the Kremlin did not take kindly to these declarations. Official statements described Franken's rhetoric as irresponsible and absolute abnormality.
This reaction underscores the tension that exists between Western leaders and the Russian government, who feel their military actions are consistently met with aggressive posturing. Franken further elaborated that NATO's air superiority, primarily through the deployment of advanced F-35 fighter jets, is a significant deterrent for Russia. With plans to have 600 of these jets stationed in Europe, he believes Russia is intimidated by their undetectable nature. Yet, despite these preparations,
he maintains that the threat of nuclear war is not imminent.
Instead, he foresees the risk of asymmetrical attacks, such as disruptions to essential services like the electricity grid, which could trigger panic reminiscent of pandemic shortages. Addressing the possibility of such a crisis, Franken admitted, "I keep an emergency kit at home." He shared the contents, a mix of bottled water, canned food, and battery-operated devices, reflecting a preparedness for sudden emergencies. This indicates a rational approach to an increasingly unpredictable future. Despite his calm demeanor, Franken's commentary has unearthed more than just casual threats. It reveals the high stakes involved. Following the interview, further escalatory comments emerged from Russia, hinting at a sharper edge in their military stance, leaving observers to question if Russia perceives a hidden intention behind Franken's statements. As this narrative unfolds, what may unfold next in the geopolitical landscape remains uncertain, driven by the volatile emotions and reactions on both sides. The unfolding dynamics between NATO and Russia could dictate the next wave of violence or negotiation. The question remains, how will leaders navigate this precarious path without inciting a greater conflict? The stakes are escalating, and the world watches in anticipation. As tensions escalate in Eastern Europe, a provocative comment from Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, throws fuel on the fire. In a recent interview, Franken hinted at the monumental consequences should Russia dare to strike Brussels, proclaiming that NATO's response would be unmerciful, essentially suggesting a complete annihilation of Moscow. The impact of his words rippled through European media, igniting outrage from the Kremlin. Franken's assertion to wipe Moscow from the face of the earth or simply flatten Moscow, depending on how one translates his Flemish words, has raised eyebrows. Speaking to a reporter who pressed him about the possible threat of a Russian non-nuclear missile, he defiantly replied that an attack on Brussels would provoke NATO's full military might. His remarks, dismissed by him as mere clickbait, provoked an unusual statement from the Russian embassy, accusing Franken of irresponsible rhetoric and hinting at the delusional nature of his claims. But what lies beneath this dialogue? The very heart of European security is at stake. As Franken speaks of preparing for cyber attacks on the electricity grid, which he likens to a potentially catastrophic blackout reminiscent of pandemic shortages, his words paint a picture of a Europe on edge, already battling the specter of war. He admits to keeping an emergency kit at home, a symbol of the ever-looming threat. While the Russian war machine seems formidable on the surface, its true capacity may not align with its perceived aggression. NATO enjoys significant advantages, particularly in aerial capabilities,
with plans to deploy 600 F-35 fighter jets.
However, the minister cautions against underestimating Russia's tenacity. Last-minute decisions or erratic responses could unleash chaos, especially if strategically targeted attacks hit vital infrastructures. Debates about the reliability of NATO's commitment arise, echoing skepticism about the United States' involvement in defending Europe. Discussions about defense budgets and military readiness reveal deep-seated fears regarding a new Cold War that could inflict military, economic, and social scars across the continent. What's at stake here isn't just nations clashing, it's the very fabric of everyday life that could be torn apart. As this geopolitical drama unfolds, each statement and action reverberates throughout Europe, instilling fear, uncertainty, and a collective anticipation of what tomorrow might bring. With the stakes higher than ever, can a miscalculation lead to a heated confrontation that nobody wants? The complexities continue to unfold, and this is just the beginning.
In a week that saw the conflict in Ukraine escalate dramatically, European leaders issued stark warnings, provoking an angry backlash from the Kremlin.
This tension reached a boiling point when Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade Theo Franken suggested a harsh response to a potential Russian missile strike on Brussels, promising to annihilate Moscow in retaliation. His remarks ignited headlines across Europe, and the Kremlin's fury was palpable. Franken elaborated that a Russian attack on NATO's heart would be met with decisive force, leaving no room for misinterpretation. This contentious dialogue spun a web of implications. Critically, Franken's assertion was made while addressing concerns over the potential for Putin to launch missile strikes on European soil. He dismissed such fears, arguing instead that NATO's pact guarantees a collective response so overwhelming that Russia would not dare strike first. Questions flooded in, challenging the reliability of NATO's commitments, especially in light of past disagreements involving U.S. policy under former President Trump. The stakes were raised even further when reports surfaced about Russia's burgeoning military capabilities. With the announcement of the Orshnik missile, a hypersonic weapon alleged to be unbeatable by NATO defenses, Putin's threats began to loom larger. While the Kremlin claimed the missile could reach unprecedented speeds, serious skepticism arose in Western defense circles regarding its true impact and capabilities. In the background, past military engagements like Syria and Chechnya whispered warnings about Russian resilience and strategic prowess. Franken emphasized that dismissing Russia as a paper tiger could lead to catastrophic miscalculations. He acknowledged that the tide of battle in Ukraine turned swiftly against the Russian forces due to Western support, a lifeline that has dramatically altered the landscape.
Amid this tumult, concerns about new technological warfare emerged, particularly surrounding the Poseidon underwater drone, an unsettling addition to the arsenal of Russian provocations.
This nuclear-capable machine, subject to various interpretations, could potentially launch devastating attacks from unexpected depths. The dread of such a threat heightened the urgency for NATO allies to reconsider their positions, especially with Paris and London exposed to vertical assaults from these clandestine devices. Ultimately, the interplay of political maneuvering, military assessments, and the looming specter of nuclear capabilities conjures a perilous chess game on the European stage.
As leaders like Franken engage in a rhetorical battle, the challenge remains, ensuring that words do not spiral into actions that threaten global stability.
The future beckons with uncertainty. One miscalculated step could unleash consequences that echo across continents, engulfing all in chaos.
As the conflict in Ukraine escalates dramatically, recent statements from European leaders have added fuel to the fire.
This week, Belgian Minister of Defense and Foreign Trade, Theo Franken, stirred controversy with a bold remark regarding NATO's potential response to a hypothetical missile strike on Brussels by Russia. When asked about the possibility of such an attack, he declared that should it happen, the response would be absolute: we would wipe Moscow from the map.
The Kremlin erupted with rage, and Franken quickly sought to clarify his comments, but the damage was done.
His words ignited headlines across Europe, reflecting the escalating tensions between NATO and Russia. Franken's assertion, whether translated as flatten or wipe from the face of the earth, conveys a striking message: NATO's commitment to retaliation cannot be underestimated. During the interview, Franken brushed aside doubts about the U.S. commitment to NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. He expressed disbelief that American support could wane, even citing past statements from former President Trump as mere rhetoric to be seen through. The implication is clear: NATO is united and ready to respond if Russia dares to strike at its heart.
Tensions have sharply intensified since Ukraine's counteroffensive began.
The war's contours shifted in October 2022 after Ukraine struck the Kerch Bridge, a critical supply line for Russia. In retaliation, Russia began targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, plunging the nation into blackouts and gas shortages.
Franken reiterated that the current strategies employed against Russia have been long overdue. It's time to confront the adversary directly rather than prolonging the conflict through fear.
Russia, facing mounting pressure, has threatened escalation, claiming to possess advanced missile systems capable of extraordinary speeds up to Mach 10, rendering NATO's air defenses nearly obsolete. Just imagine the scene: missiles tearing through the sky, reaching temperatures that could melt through concrete. It sounds like something straight out of a blockbuster film, yet here it is, a very real threat. When Russian forces launched missiles at critical military targets in response to Ukraine's use of long-range missiles, they marked a new chapter in this bitter war.
The tension keeps rising. Will NATO respond? The stakes have never been higher, and with both sides flexing their military might, the question looms: is this a prelude to even greater chaos? With words and actions, the narrative of this tumultuous conflict continues to unfold, leaving the world on the edge of its seat.